The planet Exorius was a masterpiece of natural chaos, a hunting ground forged by the violent whims of evolution and untouched by the restraints of civilization. The Trelvans had claimed it long ago, taming its fiercest predators and cultivating its most dangerous environments to create the ultimate spectacle of survival. Its skies were a tapestry of perpetual twilight, with twin suns casting hues of gold and violet over endless forests, jagged mountains, and rivers that shimmered like liquid mercury. This was the Trelvan Empire's pride, the crown jewel of their blood hunts, and the ultimate stage for their predatory prowess. The Trelvans were a species bred for conquest, their reptilian forms towering and imposing, covered in scales that gleamed like polished obsidian. They were warriors to their core, and their empire stretched across the stars, built on the subjugation of lesser species. To the Trelvans, dominance was not just a principle, but a sacred creed, one they demonstrated through the blood hunts. Ritualistic games where the most dangerous and defiant of their conquests were released as prey. Over centuries, they had perfected the art of the hunt, turning it into an arena for the galaxy's elite to witness their mastery. Humans were a relatively new addition to the Trelvans' roster of prey. Their homeworld, Earth, had been crushed beneath the weight of Trelvan war fleets decades earlier. To the Trelvans, humanity had been an amusing conquest, a species with the audacity to resist and the resourcefulness to prolong their inevitable fall. But in the end, they were broken like all the others, reduced to scattered survivors eking out a desperate existence under Trelvan rule. Their resilience was both an annoyance and a fascination to their conquerors, who soon realized that humans made for particularly compelling prey. Now another blood hunt was about to begin. From across the galaxy, the most powerful Trellans gathered on Exorius, eager to witness the spectacle. The Colosseum on the planet's surface was a marvel of alien architecture, a sprawling amphitheater carved into the cliffs overlooking a sea of liquid crystal. Inside its holding pens, their fate a cruel certainty. Among them was Kiera, her sharp green eyes scanning the faces of her fellow captives. She was no stranger to Trelvan cruelty, having fought in Earth's resistance during the invasion and spent years in hiding before her capture. She was lean and battle-hardened, her dark hair cropped short, and her demeanor radiated an unyielding determination. The others were a mix of ages and backgrounds, farmers, mechanics, engineers, and a few who, like Kiera, had been soldiers. They were united only by their shared fear and the knowledge that survival was unlikely. The air in the holding pens was stifling, heavy with the scent of sweat and despair. A man sitting near Kiera, his face pale and drawn, broke the silence. "It doesn't matter what we do. They're going to hunt us down like animals. We don't stand a chance." Kiera crouched beside him, her voice low but firm. "That's what they want you to believe, but if we play their game, we're already dead. We have to make our own rules." The man's hollow eyes searched hers for a shred of hope. "What can we do against them? They have the weapons, the armor, the technology. We have nothing." "We have the one thing they don't," Kiera said. "The will to survive. These hunts are their pride, their spectacle. They've never faced prey that fights back. If we can turn the tables, even for a moment, we might have a chance." Before the man could respond, the holding pens shuddered as the transport ships docked above. A deep, mechanical hum filled the air, followed by the clanging of doors opening. The Trelvan's handlers, clad in gleaming armor, herded the humans into lines with electrified prods. Kiera felt the current of fear ripple through the group as they were marched onto the ships, their fates sealed. The transports ascended into the skies of Exorius, their sleek forms gliding through the atmosphere like predators stalking unseen prey. Inside the ship, Kiera's mind raced. She studied her surroundings, the handlers, the controls, the layout of the hold. Every detail mattered. Every second counted. When the ships reached their destination, the humans were released into the wilderness. The Trelvans allowed a head start, a tradition that was less about fairness and more about savoring the thrill of the chase. The forest stretched endlessly before them, its alien flora glowing faintly in the fading light. Towering trees loomed overhead, their iridescent bark shimmering like polished metal. The air was thick with the hum of alien insects and the distant roars of unseen predators. The humans scattered in a panic, their survival instincts overriding any sense of cohesion. Kiera watched them disappear into the trees, her jaw tightening. Chaos would only make them easier targets. She needed to act quickly. "Wait!" she called out to a small group nearby. They hesitated, glancing back at her. "If we split up, we're dead. We have to stick together. Trust me. I've fought them before." "What about yourself?" Ariel asked the princess. "Have you fought depression?" Reluctantly, a handful of them joined her, including the man from the holding pen. His name was Marcus, and though fear still lingered in his eyes, he carried himself with a quiet resolve. Alongside him was a young woman named Alina, a former mechanic whose sharp mind and steady hands had already proven invaluable. As night fell, the group moved deeper into the forest, avoiding open spaces and leaving false trails to confuse their pursuers. Kira led them to a narrow ravine where they could take shelter, the steep walls providing some measure of protection. "We need to think like them," Kiera said as they gathered around her. "They'll use drones to track us and pick us off from a distance. We have to take out their eyes first." "But how?" Marcus asked. "We have nothing to fight with." Kira gestured to the forest around them. "We have this. The terrain is our ally. We'll set traps, disable their drones, and scavenge whatever we can. If we can take down even one of them, we'll have weapons and armor." The group worked through the night, crafting crude traps from vines, branches, and stones. Kira taught them what she had learned from years of resistance: how to stay hidden, how to strike from the shadows, and how to think 3 steps ahead. By dawn, the first Trelvan hunter arrived. Clad in gleaming armor and armed with a plasma rifle, he moved with the confidence of a predator certain of his dominance. He scanned the area with a drone hovering at his side, its sensors sweeping the forest floor. He didn't see the tripwire until it was too late. The explosion sent him flying, his armor scorched and his drone reduced to scrap. Kiera and her group moved swiftly, emerging from their hiding spots to disarm and disable the stunned hunter. They stripped him of his weapons and armor, their victory tempered by the knowledge that more would come. For the first time in the history of the blood hunts, the prey had struck back. As the group retreated deeper into the forest, Kiera felt a glimmer of hope. The Trelvans were arrogant, their confidence a weakness that could be exploited. If the humans could survive long enough to turn that arrogance against them, they might have a chance to rewrite their fate. High above the forest, in the observation decks of the Colosseum, the Trelvan hunters watched the unfolding events with a mixture of amusement and intrigue. The initial skirmish was unexpected but not alarming. After all, humans were known for their unpredictability, and the thrill of the hunt lay in overcoming such challenges. But as the hours passed and more hunters encountered resistance, the mood began to shift. The humans were not simply running, they were fighting. They were adapting. And for the first time, the Trelvans began to wonder if their prey had become something more dangerous than they had ever imagined. The Trelvans had underestimated humanity. It was a mistake that in the coming days would cost them more than they could have ever imagined. When the first few human groups began to fight back, the Trelvans regarded it as a mere nuisance. They believed they were dealing with nothing more than a few desperate, frightened individuals grasping for survival. But as the hours passed and the bodies of their own soldiers began to pile up, the hunters' arrogance began to turn to concern. Kira had known from the moment they were dropped into the wilderness that the key to surviving the blood hunt was not in strength or technology, but in resourcefulness. The Trelvans had been so sure of their superiority, so confident in their weapons, that they had not expected the humans to fight back at all. And that was their greatest mistake. They hadn't anticipated the one thing that made humanity different: their will to survive, even when faced with insurmountable odds. After their first kill, Kira and her group moved quickly through the dense, shimmering forests of Exorius. They had acquired one of the Trellans' plasma rifles, but that alone would not be enough. The hunters had advanced technology that allowed them to track prey from miles away, and Kira knew that they would soon be looking for the humans who had dared to resist. The terrain of Exorius was a maze of towering trees and jagged rocks, a constant challenge even for the Trelvans. But the humans had learned to use it to their advantage. Kira had trained them well, teaching them to blend with the environment, to become the shadows among the trees. They created false trails, misleading the Trelvans' drones into areas where the humans had already moved on. They set traps, hidden pits, sharpened stakes, and tangled nets made from the vines that seemed to grow like sentient creatures around them. They needed to stay ahead, keep the hunters off balance, and strike at the right moment. Days passed, and the hunt became more than just survival. It became a deadly game. Kira's group had expanded, a handful of other humans joining them after seeing how they fought back. Some were older, others younger, but they all had one thing in common. They had come to understand that to survive, they would need to think like the Trelvans. Every step was a calculated risk. Every action had to be deliberate, and for every Trelvan they killed, the others grew more cautious, more calculating. Their arrogance was no longer their greatest weapon. Now, it was their greatest weakness. The humans' first few kills had been lucky, but by the time they ambushed their second group of hunters, Kira knew they had begun to understand the patterns of the Trelvans. They had learned to spot the smallest signs of the hunters' movements: the subtle rustling of leaves, the faint shimmer of a cloaked drone, the faint shimmer of an energy weapon on the horizon. They knew the forest better than their pursuers did, using its many dangers to lure the Trelvans into trap. And as the Trelvans began to lose their patience, they became sloppy. One afternoon, Kira and her group hid in the cover of a thick grove, watching as two Trelvan hunters trudged by, their armor glinting in the faint sunlight that filtered through the trees. They were methodical, scanning every inch of their surroundings, but they were overconfident, not realizing that their prey had been stalking them for hours. Kira nodded to Marcus, signaling him to move into position. With a single, fluid motion, they set their trap, a net woven from thick vines and coated with a sticky resin that could entangle the hunters in seconds. As the two Trellans moved closer, Kira tensed. She could feel the weight of every breath, the pulse of adrenaline in her veins. She waited for the perfect moment. At the last second, the net snapped shut, and the Trellans were pulled off their feet. They struggled, their weapons firing randomly into the air as they tried to break free, but the humans were already on them. The first hunter fell quickly, his armor torn away, revealing the pale, scaly skin underneath. Marcus pressed a plasma rifle to his chest, and with a single shot, the hunter was silenced. The second was slower, his movements more deliberate, but his panic was evident. He managed to pull a knife from his belt, swiping at the humans around him, but it was too late. Alina, the mechanic, struck from behind, using a makeshift blade to cut through the hunter's throat. Blood spilled from the wound in a slick, glowing stream, and the Trelvan dropped to the ground, his body twitching for only a moment before going still. Kira stood over the fallen hunters, her heart pounding in her chest. They had done it again. The humans had struck back, and the Trellans were no longer the predators. They were prey. But the victory was bittersweet. The hunt was not over, And Kiera knew that the Trelvans would not let this insult go unpunished. They would come for them with everything they had. The humans were no longer simply targets. They were an affront to the Trelvan Empire. And that would make them more dangerous than ever. As the group moved on, the Trelvans began to respond in kind. They were no longer hunting for sport. They were hunting for vengeance. Kiera and her group began to feel the shift. The forest, which had once felt like a sanctuary, now seemed like a vast, dangerous trap with no place to hide. The drones were everywhere, their sensors sweeping the landscape in search of any signs of life. The Trellans themselves became more aggressive, sending smaller, faster groups of hunters to track down the humans and force them into the open. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the group gathered in a hollow beneath a cluster of alien trees, trying to catch their breath. They had been on the run for nearly a week, and food and water were beginning to run low. The hum of the drones filled the air, and the glow of their searchlights crisscrossed the sky like a storm of light. "We can't keep running like this," Alina said, her voice tight with exhaustion. "They'll find us eventually." "We need to fight back," Kiera replied, her voice steady despite the fatigue that weighed on her. "We can't afford to just hide. We need to hit them hard." But Marcus shook his head. "How? They have technology we can't even begin to understand. They're everywhere. We're running out of time." Kiera was silent for a moment. Then she looked toward the sky, her eyes narrowing as she noticed a small, fast-moving object streaking across the heavens. "A Trelvan ship. They've underestimated us before," she said, her voice cold with resolve. "They think they're winning, and that's when we'll strike." The Trelvans had no idea how much danger they were in. They thought they were chasing mere prey, but they had no idea what humans were capable of when they were pushed to the brink. As the days passed, Kiara began to formulate a plan, one that would turn the tables once and for all. It would require everything they had, every scrap of knowledge, every ounce of strength. But Kiara knew it was their only chance. And so, the humans began to prepare for the final battle. They had learned how to use the Trelvans' weapons, how to disable their drones, and how to move as one. They would no longer run. They would fight. The time for hiding was over. The humans were about to make their stand, and the Trelvans were going to regret ever underestimating them. The days that followed marked a critical turning point for Kiera and the survivors. The Trelvans had made a grave mistake, underestimating humanity. They had come to think of the humans as nothing more than animals to be hunted for sport. But the humans had adapted, learned, and evolved in ways the Trelvans never anticipated. What had started as a desperate attempt at survival had now become a calculated fight for vengeance and freedom. The first few days after the first victory had been a blur of running, hiding, and evading Trelvan hunters. They moved constantly, rarely stopping for more than a few hours to rest. Every night was filled with the hum of drones overhead, the low growl of predators in the distance, and the constant threat of discovery. But Kiera had never allowed fear to cloud her judgment. She knew that time was running out, that sooner or later the Trelvans would escalate their efforts and find a way to flush them out. The key to survival now was not evasion but preparation, preparing for the moment when they would turn the tide and make their move. During their brief rests, Kiera would gather her group together and go over their plans. They had a single advantage now. They had captured a Trelvan hunter. While the others had been celebrating their success, Kiera had taken the time to examine the armor, weapons, and equipment that the hunter had carried. It wasn't much, just standard-issue plasma rifles, energy knives, and a set of reconnaissance tools. But there was one piece of equipment that stood out. A communication device that would allow them to hack into the Trelvan network. If they could get this working, they might be able to pinpoint the locations of the hunters, their ships, and, most importantly, their command center. This was the key to everything. If they could disrupt the Trelvans' coordination, they could force them into disarray, give the humans a fighting chance. Kiera spent hours studying the device, connecting it to a series of makeshift terminals that Alina had set up. The mechanic was proving herself invaluable, quickly understanding the Trelvan technology and finding ways to modify it for their use. It wasn't easy. Nothing about this fight was. But with every success, the group grew more confident. Meanwhile, the Trelvans were growing desperate. They had underestimated the humans' resolve, and now they were beginning to understand the true nature of their prey. The Trelvans' pride, their belief in their invincibility, was starting to crumble. Their soldiers were being killed in increasingly daring ambushes. The human resistance was proving tougher than they had thought. They had made a dangerous assumption, that humans would flee in fear, that they would scatter and break under the pressure. But humanity had done the opposite. They had fought back. The first major clash came when Kira's group ambushed a Trelvan supply convoy. The convoy was carrying much-needed resources for the hunters, drones, energy weapons, and more advanced technology. If the humans could take it out, they would gain a crucial advantage. They had been tracking the convoy for days, knowing it would eventually pass through a narrow canyon that was perfect for an ambush. The canyon was a natural choke point, with jagged rocks and cliffs on either side. It was the perfect place to set up traps. Kiera had ordered her group to dig into the terrain, creating hidden pits and snares that would take out the convoy's vehicles. They had scavenged parts from the wreckage of previous hunts, crafting explosives and makeshift barricades from scrap metal. It wasn't a flawless plan. There were too many variables, too many ways it could go wrong, but it was the best they could do with the resources they had. As the convoy approached, the tension in the air was palpable. The humans were hidden among the rocks, weapons in hand, eyes locked on their targets. Kiera could hear the distant hum of the Trellan's engines as the convoy entered the canyon. It was time. With a signal from Kiera, the first traps were set off. Explosions rocked the canyon as the Trellan's transport vehicles were shredded by hidden mines. The air was thick with smoke and debris as the convoy screeched to a halt. The humans moved quickly, rushing to the wreckage of the vehicles. They didn't have much time. The Trelvans would send reinforcements. But in the chaos of the attack, Kiera's group was able to secure the supplies, capturing several drones and weapon systems. The Trelvans responded quickly, sending out their elite hunters to flank them. But the humans had already melted into the terrain. They were ghosts, moving through the canyon with the precision and stealth that the Trelvans had long forgotten. For a brief moment it felt as though the humans were winning, until a new threat appeared. A Trelvan warship appeared overhead, its shadow casting an ominous pall over the canyon. It was a formidable ship, its guns capable of incinerating an entire forest in a single volley. The ship hovered above the canyon, its senses scanning the ground below, looking for any sign of the humans. The group didn't have much time. Kiera could hear the low rumble of the warship's weapons charging, preparing for an airstrike. "Move!" she shouted to her group, urging them to move faster. They sprinted up the canyon walls, their muscles burning, their breath ragged. Behind them, the warship's guns unleashed a devastating barrage, turning the ground below into a fiery inferno. Kiera heard the screams of the Trelvan soldiers as the explosions tore through the canyon. The blast waves pushed them forward, but it also meant that the Trellans were close. The humans were no longer just being hunted, they were in a race against time. Kiera led her group through the narrow cave system they had discovered, a labyrinth of tunnels carved into the cliffs. The deeper they went, the further from the warship's sensors they got. For now, they were safe. But Kiera knew that safety was fleeting. The Trelvans would not stop. They would never stop. If anything, this attack would only make them more determined to destroy every last human on the planet. There was no turning back now. The group was in this fight for good, and the only way out was through. They would either break the Trelvans' will to hunt them, or they would die trying. As the group caught their breath in the relative safety of the caves, Kiera reflected on how far they had come. Just days ago they had been scattered, disorganized, and hopeless. Now they had become a force, united, purposeful, and ready to take on the empire that had thought them weak. The Trelvans had never imagined that their prey would become the hunters, but they were beginning to realize it now. Kara had one goal now, to finish what they had started. The blood hunt would be no more. She would make sure of it, even if it meant sacrificing everything. The humans had become the hunted, but now they were the ones who would set the terms of the game. They would no longer be prey. They would be the ones to hunt the hunters. But they wouldn't be protected, and they would hear the hunts play out in their minds. For years, the Trelvans had awakened a sleeping giant, and they had no idea what they had unleashed. The time for running was over. The humans would fight until the last breath, until the last drop of blood, and they would make the Trelvans pay for every life they had taken. The hunt was over. Now, it was time for the humans to become the predators.